Okay, so 10 minutes late isn't terribly bad. At least I think it's not. But that said, whew, 2 hours of sleep. Not anywhere near as much sleep as I wish I had actually managed to get normally. But, how's it going, guys? So, as you can see over there, I don't have my mirroring on. It's that ish way. There we go. If I think I'm pointing to it now, right? There we go. And up to sneeze. Ugh. So I'm not feeling all that great this morning, if you guys can't tell. But on the bright side, I do have some good news. Hopefully, you guys will enjoy the news that I have to bring with you. And yes, the title is absolutely horrid, Rego. But this is the Biblical Gender Roles website, so absolutely horrid titles are par for the course. That said, I am going to do the first thing that's needed during a time like this, and that is to take down some cold meds. But now that that is taken care of, here in about an hour, those will kick in and actually fix everything. And by that time, it will already be too late, and the quality of this stream will be completely gone already. But that's fine. So, before we get into this particular website, now, as usual, I have linked the actual article in the description. So if you guys want to follow along with this, then by all means you can. But as per usual, it's pretty gross. It's pretty horrible stuff. This is the third time I've tackled this website, so definitely be careful when you're browsing it. It's not exactly a pretty site. It's actually pretty horrendous, all things considered. But the good news, here this Thursday, last night I managed to finally confirm that Thursday I should be recording for a collaboration with Telltale. So if any of you are Telltale fans, then me and him are going to be getting everything taken care of for that. Also, Eris Mandix, it is the Biblical Gender Roles website. Their website is linked in my description below so that you guys can actually take a look at it. But yes, we will be doing a collaboration with Telltale. A script is written for that, and we're going to be recording for that Thursday. Hopefully, we should be able to release that video either this Friday or sometime early next week. So that's something cool. And if you aren't a fan of Telltale, first of all, your taste might not be that great. Telltale's awesome, but if a collaboration with Telltale isn't up your speed, then last night I just finished the first draft of a script for a collaboration between me and Logic. So, if you guys are Logic fans, then we will have a collaboration for that. It's going to be airing sometime in February. I just have to have him review the draft of the script and us to go through and see how we're going to go with that. But that's already been confirmed as well. So those are two collaborations that you guys can look forward to here in the near future. That's what I was doing last night. I was getting all of that. So yeah, lack of sleep. I am way too busy. But with that said, this website, whew, oh boy, this is interesting. As per usual, I've only skimmed the article. I have not actually gone through and read the entire thing. I've only taken a cursory glance at this particular article. The article's name is actually called Why God Wants You to Stay in an Abusive Relationship. For those of you who are listening as opposed to watching, since I know that some of you guys are probably driving, doing other things, can't exactly look at the actual screen. So, also I see that Godless Journey is in the chat, which is awesome because I have not been able to talk to Godless Journey in a while. He recently got out of recovery, and I am more than happy to see that he's slowly becoming active again. But Aaron says the article actually got her vomiting, so... Ooh, that's not good. That's not good at all. Also, Godless Trinity, as for what happened to the hair, I got tired of it going everywhere, and the only thing that was keeping the hair in place on streams was putting the headphones on. So I would actually make sure that whenever I put the headphones on, that was covering things down, but it still looked like I had never met a comb, even if I'd actually combed my hair. So I finally said screw it, and just took a buzz cutter to it. Eventually, it will get back up. Daniel Davis says, Shannon, Paul, Bionic Dance, Godless Cranium. Well, actually, me and Bionic Dance have already done collaborations before. She's part of the first 4 episodes of my Matt Powell series, and we actually did a collaboration on intercessory prayer and faith healing. So Bionic Dance and I have already done a lot of stuff together. As for Godless Cranium, I've been over on his channel. I did a Q&A on his channel. And then also, on top of that, we did... I was his co-host for one of his last Heathen Hour episodes. So, I've already actually done stuff with some of them. Shannon's also been on my channel quite a few times as well. And then me and Paul have been together on Non Sequitur Show for an episode or two. So, all things considered, I've actually done stuff with all of those creators. I'm big fans of all of them as well. And have I ever done something with Godless Iowan? Oh, dear Lord. If there's a creator who I've collaborated with the most, it is probably Iowan, considering that the entire Peanut Butter Wars series was just one giant accidental collaboration. But, oh boy. That all said. Yes, Suris went to war with Shiai. Yeah, no, I actually drove to Iowa. Granted, I was driving to Iowa to go to his wedding, but it just so happens that since I was in Iowa, we were able to film an entire segment for that little Peanut Butter War series, with us actually there together as opposed to just throwing propaganda at one another. So that was interesting. But as we are here, it's only been like, 8 minutes, and we haven't even gotten into the article, just been doing updates to everything that's been going on. But yeah, I figured that would probably let you guys know why I am 10 minutes late. I kind of got up at like 10:25, shoved a couple pieces of pizza in my mouth, obviously just took my cold medicine, and here we are. So, those are past and future collaborations, and there should be some other stuff in the pipeline as well. There are a couple of creators who I've been talking with about doing stuff, but because we haven't fully confirmed anything, I don't want to let those slip out yet. But I did want to let you guys know about the ones that are currently sitting in the pipeline that you guys can be excited for. That said, let's go ahead and go right in. And yes, Zero, the headline is atrocious. It is awful. And with a headline like that, it's only going to get worse from here. I'm actually concerned. Because if I scroll down, 1, it means that we have to start actually looking through this article. 2, the article is quite long, so there's going to be some skimming. There's going to be a little bit of like what happened with me and Digital Hammurabi. When we actually went through and had to skip a good chunk and just go down to the conclusion for time's sake. That's probably going to be something that happens here. One last thing. For those of you who are familiar with the Raging Atheist, he's recently started to get incorporated into the skeptic atheist community that we know now. He had started out as just kind of influenced by T.J. Kirk and Cult of Dusty and like your really old school atheist skeptic content creators. But since starting the Matt Powell series, he's started to get integrated into the community at large now. So he's trying to get them on his channel to talk with them and get up to speed with everything that's been going on, because he's been in kind of a little isolation bubble, even though he's been creating content. And as a result, at the end of this stream, I am actually going to be hopping over to his channel here at 12:30 Eastern and doing a conversation / interview / whatever he wants to do over on his channel. So here in a little bit, I'll actually be adding the link to his channel in the description below so that you guys can follow me over there once we get there. So hopefully you guys will enjoy this, as painful as it's going to be to go through, and then hopefully those of you that are not tired of listening to my dumb voice quite yet will hop over there with me as well and show him some support over on his channel. So, with that said, the last important bit of information before we go in is that one of the other things that took me so much time is that my pop filter had actually gotten stolen by my cats. So, that's always fun. That's my favorite. Alright. And I think, yes, Paul's story, I think Girl Defined did actually do a video on this subject. But Girl Defined is more genetically modified skeptic and Mr. Atheist's toys to mess with. I'll tackle them every now and again, but they're less the speed of my channel than something like this. Because stuff like this actually has Bible literalism and stuff like that, stuff that I like tackling. So, will I tackle a Girl Defined video on this? Probably at some point. But it's not super high on my priority list. So, let us scroll down and see what our first article says. Also, if you guys can't read that, let me know, and I'll see what I can do to adjust the screen, but I think you guys should be able to read it. But what it does say is, stay in an abusive marriage. Stay with an abusive father or mother. Oh, that's a clarification. To assert that anyone should ever stay in an abusive relationship is counter to everything our culture teaches. That's another clarification. That's awkward. We are to confront or flee abusive situations, but we should never ever endure abusive situations, or so we are told today, even in the vast majority of Christian circles. I've read enough of this person's articles so far to know that that clarification there is not on accident. And it's concerning. So, in my previous article, What Does the Bible Say About Abuse?, I talked about what abuse is from a biblical perspective. I did not read that article. Probably should have gone through that one first. But like I said, I skimmed this, so I didn't even know there was a pre-article. I stated that the word literally is a plus use, which means to misuse or mistreat someone or something. I also talked about both emotional, including verbal abuse, and physical abuse, as they are spoken to in the Bible, with a specific emphasis on what abuse looks like in marriage. Also, I believe that I'm smacking my lips a little more than I should. I am sorry about that. That's something that I gain a particular proclivity to whenever I'm actually sick, which I shouldn't do, especially considering that you're having to listen to me on a mic, so I apologize. Especially after making fun of that one content creator for doing that constantly. That was a bad thing for me to do if I'm going to start smacking my lips in front of a freaking microphone. Ugh. So, continuing in. But what I did not cover were two important areas of the subject of abuse. The first is, what role does God grant the government in dealing with abuse? The second is how family members, including husbands, wives, and children, should respond when they are abused by one another in various ways. Well, Nelsie, you may not have noticed the smacking, but I kind of did. Unfortunately, if you notice, take a listen to my videos and try to listen for my breathing. A good comparison is take a Vice Rhino video and take one of my videos and listen to them one after another. You'll notice that in the Vice Rhino videos, he doesn't edit out his breaths. Whereas me, I'm anal about editing out every individual breath to make sure that you guys don't hear it. That's not to say anything bad about Vice Rhino. I love his content. It's just, he doesn't mind the breaths in his content, and I mind it in mine. And when I listen to ours next to one another, I can hear the difference. I can hear the breaths, and every time I'm just like, ugh. Maybe it's because my voice and Vice Rhino's are like kind of similar, so when I hear the breaths in his, it feels like I'm hearing it out of my audio, and it just feels strange. I know, Jordanelle, you haven't missed the horrendous yet. We're just getting into it. We're just getting into it. Honestly, that doesn't sound like a fun way to spend my time. That's perfectly fine. Look, how I choose to edit my videos is my own torture device. So, did God grant the government the power to determine what abuse is? Many Christians, instead of looking to the Bible for their definition of abuse, instead look to their feelings, their culture, and most commonly, their civil government. I've already got some problems with this. For one, if you feel like you're being abused in a relationship, the last thing you should be looking for is what a 2,000-year-old holy book says abuse is. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to bank on the scholars that canonized the particular pieces of the Bible during the Council of Nicaea. I'm not going to bank on them having the right combination of books together to determine whether or not I'm going to be abused. Not something that I'm going to do. Luisa says rhinos do breathe heavy, their size and all. It's true. It's true. And yes, Vice Rhino is really Pelagia. They are the same person. Vice Rhino actually put a tweet out yesterday that was just horribly hilarious, if I can segue for a second. I think his tweet was, if Vice Rhino and Pelagia had sex, would they be cheating on Mrs. Rhino and Shannon Q, or would it be masturbation? And I don't know. I actually don't know. That's definitely an interesting scenario to think of, but now I'm thinking of Rhino and Paul having sex, and it's weird. And I'm going to get back to the really abusive article, because that's actually less weird than thinking about that. But, and yes, when I heard that Vice Rhino was an anagram of Eric Hovind, I freaked out a little bit. But, said, first we must understand that it is God who defines. Hello, kitty. How are you doing today? I see that you have decided that my back is a good playing pen. Could you not? First, we must understand that it is God who defines the responsibilities, rights, and limitations of the spheres of authority of the civil government, the church, and the family. Abuse is a moral issue, and it is God, not the culture or government, that defines what is moral and what is immoral. Okay, so the issue that I have with that statement is that already seems like it's trying to define functional government as a theocracy, and I am not a fan of that. Reasons why I'm not a fan of theocracy. You could get the golden combination of religious laws that create the perfect society. Are you cheating now on Mrs. Suris with the cat? No. If I was, then Pam would be cheating on me with the cats as well. I think 2 of them are still sleeping with her. It just so happens that I have 1, 2, 3 of them out here. But you could magically get the golden combination of laws from a holy book to create the perfect society in a theocracy. You could. It's possible. But it's equally possible that you could get any combination of rules out of a holy book that creates the absolutely most repugnant version of a society that you could get. I'm talking about your Saudi Arabias. That's a good example. I have a friend who actually had to flee Saudi Arabia and had to flee to Egypt in order to not get persecuted, because he was an atheist. So in Saudi Arabia, he would be beheaded, whereas in Egypt, it's a little better for him. He will only be sent to jail if he's found out. So you can get that combination that leads you to a Saudi Arabia. You could get that combination of laws that leads you to an Egypt. You can get the combination of laws that leads you to what's happening in Nigeria, where they have 12 states in the north that are all judged under Sharia law. And then you've got the 14 states in the South that are all judged under Christian law. And it's oppressive in both versions of the society. You could get those. So no, I'm not a fan of any form of theocracy, because the ability to get a perfect society out of it while there it's so small of a chance to actually get that society versus the chance that you're just going to end up with a Saudi Arabia or a Nigeria or an Egypt. So, no. There is no part of me that wants a theocracy. And when I read something like this and it says that the Bible, or God, because the two are one and the same when we're talking about biblical literalists, the Bible or God defines the responsibilities and limitations of the government, I don't want that to be the case ever. Because the last thing I want is a God who's willing to genocide the entire world except for 8 people, creating a genetic bottleneck. I don't want him making laws for me. Just no. Absolutely not. Yeah, and you're basing it off unfalsifiable claims. Yeah, there are some unfalsifiable claims that I'm kind of okay with, because like you can't really falsify whether or not there's a moral axiom. You can't do that. I'm fine with that, though. The problem is that a moral axiom can be a little more fluid than a god. A god is typically going to be, once you define it once, then it has to be consistent, otherwise it's not God anymore, and that's kind of dangerous. Let's see. So it says, many Christians have been wrongly taught that civil government is an unlimited power established by God. This comes from a false understanding of passages like the ones below. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them are sent for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. Passages like the one above must be taken into context with the entirety of the Scriptures. Christ himself stated that civil government is in fact limited in its scope and authority. As Jesus said, answering unto them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. I don't like that story. Because when you read a lot of the stories about Jesus, they have so many trappings of what we now know as a standard superhero story. Especially when you add in the "and they marveled at him afterwards." That's just blatant superhero story as madness. Granted, I'm not a mythicist, so this is, even taken into consideration that I'm not a mythicist, I still read that as a freaking superhero story. And it's from Mark. It's one of the more down-to-earth stories about Jesus. Jesus did not say, give to God what is God's and everything else belongs to Caesar. His words were carefully measured. He said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, which tells us that God intends for civil government to be limited. So the next question we must ask is, what is the scope of responsibility and power that God has given to the government? The answer is found in Romans chapter 13. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Okay. Well, let's see what his apologetic is for this. The government is God's revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. It is the civil government's job to enforce God's moral law, not to make moral law on its own. Okay. So what this is basically saying is that the government doesn't actually have a job at this point. Because you could actually have this enforced by just society in general. Go down to Alabama as an example, and do something that is against the Ten Commandments, and watch how fast that law is enforced by the general populace. What it's basically saying is that the government is just supposed to take whatever laws are in the Bible and enforce them as they will. Problem is, especially when you're looking at this from a biblical literalist perspective, what laws are they going to enforce? Are they going to enforce Mosaic law? Which version of the Ten Commandments are they going to go with? Because there's the original one that people try to throw up into courthouses, and then there's the actual one that made it in the Ark of the Covenant that talks about boiling baby goats. So, do you use those? Are we talking Levitical law? Leviticus has some laws in it that I really would rather not ever be instigated into a society, ever. Not a fan. Or are we going to be talking about a lot of the New Testament laws, post-New Covenant? Because if we're talking about any of those, unfortunately, New Testament law isn't that much better. It's a little better, but New Testament law still allows for things like slavery. So, if you're going to have New Testament law, you still have slavery. You still have United States of like 200 years ago. Not a scenario that I want for any reason, for anybody. So there's not a version of biblical law that I would like enforced in my country, at least. Albeit, you could easily take this into context and say that, again, if we were to base this on the Quran, we'd find even worse things. Surah 2 and Surah 4 combined guarantees that women's rights will be regressed another 700 years. For anybody who's read the Quran, if you haven't, I would highly suggest doing so. It's not that long of a book. It's like 4/5 the size of the New Testament, is how Logic put it, and I actually agree. It's not a horribly long book. It's a terribly badly written book. You can tell that it was written by dictation, but it's not a good book. But it's a book that should definitely be read, especially if you're going to engage in these kinds of conversations. That said, also I see that Raging Atheist is in the chat, which is awesome, because like I said before, me and him are going to actually be doing something later today. So that is very cool. It's probably going to open me up to, that's going to open me up to his channel instead of the channel that it needed to go to. But that's fine, because I needed to go ahead and put Nagatsuchi into my description. Ugh. Again, sorry for the measured tone of my voice. Unfortunately, that's what happens when you're sick. Alright guys, if you guys happen to refresh your page, which you don't have to do right now, but you will see the link to Raging Atheist's channel, which is where I'm going to be later today. So, with that said, we will continue the madness that is this article. It says, murder is not wrong because the United States government or our state government says it's wrong. Murder is wrong because God says it's wrong. But it's not wrong when God does it, apparently. I'm going to do a thing real quick. Let's go ahead and do something interesting. Now, I'm not one to use definitions. I'm typically one to assert my own for the purposes of a conversation. But let's go ahead and look up the definition of murder for fun. It says the unlawful premeditated killing of one human being by another. So the only difference between murder and killing is whether or not it's lawful. You can never murder if it's a lawful killing. But if the government's laws say that something is lawful, let's say that we have a law to cut off somebody's head for blaspheming, that's lawful. That's a lawful killing. It's bad, it's horrible, but it would be a lawful killing. I honestly don't have a use for something like murder, mainly because I think that just killing another human being, a premeditated killing, like if you're in self-defense, obviously that's its own story, but any type of premeditated killing should be wrong. I don't give a shit whether it's lawful or not. If I happen to see that, a news reporter is in the middle of the Middle East and gets their head chopped off in front of a camera, and that's a government-sponsored killing, unfortunately, I'm still going to call it murder, because fuck whether it's lawful or not. Not something I care about. All I care about is that you extinguished a human life for no reason. Am I finding the article difficult? Not difficult, because I've actually gone through other articles on this website from these people. Not a fan of anything they've written. It's just I know that this is a particularly long article already, so going through it is just going to be a matter of time. So when police officers or other law enforcement officers arrest murderers to stand trial to ultimately face punishment, they are acting as God's ministers. When the judge or jury hand down the sentence, they are acting as God's revenger, executing wrath on him that doeth evil. This is just an attempt to frame any type of government intervention as if it is all by the Bible. But America's laws aren't based on the Bible. England's laws are not based on the Bible. Most countries do not actually have their laws based on a holy book. Now, there are some that do. Like I said, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, some of them do have laws based on their holy books. But I can at least say that America's laws are not based on a holy book, so I don't have any use for any of the shit in here at all. It says, now our punishments for breaking God's moral law may be different in each state, province, or country, but the moral law of God itself cannot be added to or changed by anyone but God itself. Well, it actually can't be added to or changed at all, because at what point do you determine that a law has actually been changed? That book has not changed for, when was the frickin' Nicene Creed? 300 AD? So we got 1700 years of that book not really being changed. We've had different iterations of it. Obviously, there's the King James Version in the 1600s. There's the Jehovah's Witnesses version, 1700s, 1800s. There's the Mormons reformatting. I believe my history could be wrong. So there's different versions of the Bible, no doubt. But all in all, the Bible itself has been an unchanged book. Obviously, yes, it has actually been changed. My point is not that it's inerrant because it's been unchanged. I'm an atheist. I don't give two flying craps what's in that book. But my point in bringing it up as an unchanged book, for the most part, is that putting in part of this article is that God can change the law. Well, he can't. Because the only way that God would be able to change that law would be by changing that book. Because the only method of communication that most Christians think they have with their God is through that book. Darth Killer says that Saudi doesn't have laws based on their holy book. They don't have laws besides their holy book. Different lawyers and judges are the imams. Fair. Yeah, that is a distinction that needs to be had there. Guissa, I am the law. I am the law. Sorry, I had to. Oh God, dry mouth, my favorite. Sweet tea. Very useful for combating dry mouth. Not great for a cold, though. So, now it says, the civil government must always be respectful of its limitations when it enters the sphere of the church or the home. Oh, so it's not the church that should be limited because of the government. It's the government that should be limited because of the church. No, I disagree. I disagree completely. This means that they must never usurp or take authority in matters which God has not given to the government, but instead has given to the church or their home. Well, I don't think there should be any authority given to the church. I'll be honest with you right there. Because if there was authority given to the church, then we might have situations like a Matt Powell situation where they say that the government should be responsible for executing homosexuals or anybody in the LGBTQ sphere. If I were to agree that that type of power should be given to the church, then we would just have the church executing them instead because they would accept that on their authority. I don't want a world where that's actually the case. I think if I lived in that kind of world, my activism might be a little bit less passive. As it turns out, when I do engage in any form of activism, it's typically in a method of trying to educate. trying to bring an even-handed approach to any situation if I can, and then talking about it on my channel. That's my form of activism when it comes to situations like this. If I found myself in a situation where I had a church-run state, that activism would, like I said, be incredibly more active, because it would need to be. It would be necessitated by the situations and circumstances that I would find myself in. And if churches had that authority, unfortunately, enough churches have a history of sexual scandal that there's no part of me that would like to be in a situation where they had any ability to govern me. Absolutely not. It says, God has appointed pastors as the interpreters of God's moral law in the church assembly, and he has appointed husbands as the interpreters of, oh God, there's this shit again, of God's moral law in the home. God states this regarding our obedience to church leaders. Obey them, that they have rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch your souls, as they must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. Hebrews. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's what he just did here. And it's one of the reasons why this website is horrible. So when me and Dr. Josh and Megan went over in the Biblical Gender Roles 2 episode that I did on my channel, not last Friday, but the Friday before that, when we did that episode, there was a thing that he kept doing, and it was comparing the husband to Christ, saying that the husband is like Christ, the husband is like Christ, the husband is likened unto Jesus Christ. And he did it so that any time that Jesus Christ would put down any type of authority, that the husband would be given equal authority. He likened the wife unto the church, who Christ has authority over in the Bible, and likened the husband to Christ, so that the husband had authority. Basically, it gave the husband free reign to not be accountable to the wife in the actual article that we went through. So, what's happening here? Well, he's likening the husband to the priests. He's calling the priest the lawgiver, so the husband is the lawgiver. So, as a result, what we have here is a situation where abuse is given by God. Like what the definition of abuse is given by God. And God can state the moral law that says what abuse is or is not the government, according to this person. So, as a result, if we give that power to the husband instead, the husband can be as abusive as they want to their spouse. As long as they frame the type of abuse that they're doing as not abuse, somehow, then they are suddenly free to abuse in any way, shape, or form, because they can just define that abuse arbitrarily as something else. As an example, if we were to take a biblical example of what would be considered abusive and horrible to a slave, beating your slave within an inch of their life as long as they live for a couple days after the beating. You don't get in trouble as long as they live for a couple days after the beating. Framing things like that, absolutely not moral in any way, shape, or form. So, the next part, it says, when I walk into my church assembly, I must always recognize that God has given my pastor the spiritual oversight of that assembly. That means if I were to teach Sunday school in my church, or teach from the pulpit in his absence, that I should not teach contrary interpretations that would cause division. This is one reason I have not taught in the church I attend in many years, and I would not because I might easily come into conflict with my pastor's interpretations on many doctrinal issues. Also, I and my family follow whatever rules my pastor sets to address standards for church activities if those standards are more conservative. But think of how absurd it would be for me to go to my local mayor or state governor and ask them their interpretation of the scriptures, and also what they think their rules for behavior within my church assembly should be. Imagine if I brought these interpretations back to my church and in direct defiance of my pastor began trying to implement them. Not only would these actions be absurd on my part, but they would be in direct contradiction with the Word of God. Those civil authorities have no authority in these matters in my church. Actually, there's a few things that I'd like to say about that. So if your church is pulling a Steven Anderson and you're saying that you need to execute a minority group of people. You need to kill them. I would argue that you should pull that up to your pastor. If it just so happens that a state governor says that that's what you need to do, then by all freaking means, do it. If it's your child who comes out of the closet who says to do it, then go to your pastor and show them that there's some issues here. The issues are not one of biblical accuracy. The issues are one of humanitarianism. But I recognize that the Bible is not a humanitarian book. It allows for horrible things to happen to people, horrible things to be done to people in general. It's been used as an excuse for all kinds of egregious things throughout the years. So, all things considered, I would want things brought to the pastor. However, when you do bring things to the pastor, there is a chance that the situation won't actually go very well for you. The collaboration that I have building up with Telltale is going to be about a person who actually tried to let Pastor Anderson's congregation know that he wasn't very happy with how he was teaching his church. And Anderson blows up on him. So just a little tidbit of information for how that recording's going to go, just so you guys know. So this thing they're talking about here is something that's actually going to be talked about in that episode. So, by the same token, God does not tell wives when they have a moral or spiritual question to go seek out their pastor, local mayor, or state governor. Instead, he tells them to seek out the spiritual head of the home. Okay, so if the wife has a moral or spiritual question, let's just go ahead and call that a moral question, because spiritual doesn't mean shit. Spiritual means something different to every person. I can ask a pagan what spiritual means, and it will mean something different, though slightly similar, to that of a Christian. But I can ask a Muslim, and it would be something different, but slightly similar to that of a Christian. And I can ask an atheist what spiritual means, and it will be something different, but maybe slightly similar. Or it's slightly similar, but different. Spiritual is a very vague term that has no true definition. So, I'm not even going to use it here. So if the wife has a moral question, they should seek the spiritual head of the home to answer that question. And no, incorrect. It might be the case that a wife finds herself in a situation where she wants to ask her husband. Let's just frame this for anybody. Somebody asks their partner about a moral issue. I've done this with Pam. I've asked her about moral issues as well. But I'd also ask my closest friends about those issues, figure out what their imperatives would be during that. Because sometimes, especially if we're talking about something like abuse, which this article is talking about, if you are being abused in your relationship, the last person you need to talk to about whether or not you're actually being abused is probably your spouse. Because if they're the ones abusing you, they're probably the ones that are most likely to tell you that you're not actually being abused. I know it's hard to consider, but that is the case here. If you're being beat or you're being emotionally abused, then at that point, why would you ask your abuser about it? You might be able to get your abuser to change. You might be able to get your abuser to see another side of things that makes them stop. But it's sometimes also not the most healthy option. Sometimes escape is the healthy option. In fact, most times I would argue that escape is the healthy option if you're being abused. Because it might be that person changes, but you have no imperative to be in that environment while they're working on themselves. If they're abusive, they don't deserve you being in the environment with them. Period. So, he goes on to say, "Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted for them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. And if they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is a shame for women to speak in the church." So here's the reason why biblical literalism bothers the crap out of me. So this is from 1 Corinthians. And if we actually do some research into what was happening around the time where 1 Corinthians was being jotted down as part of Paul's history, in this scenario, the women of the church, if memory serves, were actually kind of like conspirators. There was something going on in the church actively that Paul was trying to stop. And so he told the women of that church that they needed to keep their silence. It was not permitted. They had lost their rights to do so. Granted, saying that a group of people should lose their rights to speech is wrong. But again, there's a context to the time and place where this actually happened. The imperative here was to a single group of individuals in a single church. This is not a sweeping imperative to all Christians. But if you're a biblical literalist, it is. Because there's no study for a biblical literalist. There's no study into what happened around that time. There's no study for the context of that time. Unless it's useful for them. If you confront them on something like slavery, sometimes they'll say, oh, well, it was different back then. But if you confront them on something like this, oh, it's a moral imperative for all times. Except in both cases, there's context that has to be given for those areas. And that context may or may not excuse the particular passage. In the context of slavery, there is no point in time where that's excusable. Sorry, human beings are people, not property. And here, it's kind of iffy whether or not this is even excusable. Because again, there was something actively going on in the church that Paul was trying to stop. You can't take that singular situation and use it to create a sweeping imperative for all women, saying that they have to keep silence in the church at all times. If you're going to try to teach from the Bible, if you're going to do that, which I don't recommend because I don't think that it's a book that should be taught in anything past being a piece of literature that needs to be studied for historical context and cultural context. But if you're going to actually teach it as a type of authority, then please do yourself a favor. Properly exegete your damn book. Look at the historical context of what was saying. Study Paul. Figure out what was actually fucking happening during that time. And don't fucking cherry pick the damn thing. Look at the passage. Figure out what was going on at that time. Get your information straight. Don't take it as a sweeping authority, because that is abusive. It's an abuse of power. Oh, wait a minute. That's exactly what we're talking about. Interesting. Darth Vader says, well, for slavery, there's an excuse. It was the typical moral back then. The problem, slavery points out in the Bible, like any holy book, is frozen in time and can't be read literally. Yeah, I agree. The issue is that slavery was considered a normal thing at that time. As it turns out, God's laws seem to mirror what man's laws were at the time. Fancy that. And Quisa, Paul didn't really wage war against all women. It was more this very specific situation that had happened. Now, granted, a case could be made that he was warring against all women in the church, but I would have to do some more research into that. From what I have researched, this is about a very specific situation. This is not a sweeping authoritarian ordeal from Paul. Unfortunately, because it's written in the Bible and they're using the King James Version, this person is just going to take that imperative as literal and say that it's the way it should be for everybody. And I'm sorry, that's not the fucking case. Women are people. They have equal rights to men. If they don't have equal rights to men, then you're not treating them like people. Period. That's how it works for all human beings. If you don't treat them as if they have equal rights, then you're treating them like they're subhuman, unless they do something to relinquish those rights. And sorry, being born with a vagina is not relinquishing your rights as a human being. That this is why it is highly inappropriate for government or church officials to come into a home and give wives or children instructions on morality that are counter to the teaching of the husband, who is head of the home. In fact, the husband is the only human authority in all Scripture where God commands the one under his authority to submit to him as unto the Lord. Wives, submit yourself to your own husbands as unto the Lord. Ephesians. It is a sad testament to the wicked times we live in that husbands, the most powerful of all human authorities that God ever established, have had their spiritual authority completely usurped and gutted by both our civil and church authorities. Okay, so here's the problem that I have with that. I know a little bit of the history about this person, the writer of the article. They have one failed marriage, and they have one marriage now that they are currently in. One, I feel for the wife. Because I have a suspicion that every one of these articles is a response to some type of fight or some type of conversation they had. And in the course of that conversation, the wife disagreed, and the husband just goes and writes an article about why they're right. And then screens the comments, because they actually, if you look at their about comments, they actually say they do screen the comments, and they typically only allow the positive ones there. So I'm going to paint a scenario for you that may or may not be the case, but the writer of this article could, comment here and let me know if this is not the case. But it could be the case that every time that him and his wife have an argument or a conversation about this, he writes an article about why he's an authority, gets all those positive comments, and then points them out to his wife and says, "See, I'm right." I don't know if that's what's happening. But the more articles I read from this individual, I tend to think that that's probably what's actually happening. Because in some of the earlier articles that I've read, they mentioned, it was the Should the Wife Endure Painful Sex for Her Husband article that brought this to light to me. But in that one, he mentioned that his previous wife could take more abuse during sex than his current wife could. And that his current wife can take less. But because she's a Christian woman, she has to take the same amount that he's willing to dish out. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. She must endure the painful sex. So, what I get from that is that this is a manipulative person who's hurting someone actively. It's painful to think about because this is a situation that anybody who's taught this line of reasoning, they can fall into this too and become abusers just like this person. I have no doubt that this person is an abusive husband. And if they're not, I will be very surprised because of how many apologetics there are in here about abuse. It doesn't make me wonder why he failed in his first marriage. I'm fairly certain that it's easy to figure out why. So, next part. The government has nullified... let me scroll up so you can actually see it. The government has nullified God's law with its domestic abuse definitions. The scripture tells us regarding God's law, "Ye shall not add unto the word which I command unto you, neither shall ye diminish aught from it, that ye may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command unto you." And yes, Dark Killer, I think that would be a type of Stockholm Syndrome. Maybe. I don't want to give anybody a sweeping psychological definition because I'm not an armchair psychiatrist. But there is that chance. It says, "As we previously established, the government has absolutely no right to add or take away from God's moral law, none whatsoever. Also, Christ spoke against human laws, which nullify God's laws, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things do ye." This is what our current United States Justice Department's definitions of domestic abuse do. They literally attempt to add God's moral law and, in effect, nullify God's moral law in regards to the issue of domestic abuse. With that said, I will briefly address some of the additions to and nullifications of God's law in current United States Justice Department's definitions of domestic abuse, which you can find at justice.gov, domestic violence. Also, keep in mind that all of these definitions have to do with domestic violence, meaning what is considered abuse in the home between members of the home. Okay, so let's do a thing. Domestic violence. We're here on their website. I know you guys can't see it terribly well. It's not really formatted for this. I have the screen formatted for the Gender Roles website. So, it says on here, the term domestic violence includes felony or misdemeanor crimes of violence committed by a current or former spouse or intimate partner of the victim by a person with whom the victim shares a child in common. By a person who is cohabitating with or has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse or intimate partner by a person similarly situated to the spouse, victim, under the domestic family violence laws of the jurisdiction receiving grant monies, or by any other person against an adult or youth victim, which is protected from that person's acts under the domestic or family violence laws of the jurisdiction. In an emergency, they should call 911. Okay, that is not saying what domestic violence is. That's just saying that it is a felony or misdemeanor, and it's saying what parties that actually applies to. So, no, that doesn't actually give us a really good definition. But that's fine, because they linked it here anyway. You can find a good definition here. No, you can't. There's not a definition there. Under the gender roles guy's logic, can there ever be domestic violence? I'm not certain. I'm not certain at all. That's something to think about, unfortunately. It says, the government's definition of abuse versus the Bible's definition of abuse. Sorry, I'm stuttering over my words. Physical abuse. Hitting, slapping, shoving, grabbing, punching, biting, hair pulling, etc. are types of physical abuse. This type of abuse also includes denying the partner medical care or forcing alcohol or drug use upon him or her. Oh boy. Now, I don't have an issue with that definition. That sounds like all kinds of things that I do not condone. Unless, of course, you are in a situation where somebody's doing that to you and you have to retaliate, then yes, hit, slap, shove, grab, pinch, bite, hair pull. Do everything in your power to survive if you think you're going to be hurt. But, do not instigate. So, says the first problem with this definition is that it completely negates any type of physical discipline which is commanded by God for children, and is also allowed by God for adults. Under this definition of physical abuse, spanking of one's child or one's wife would be considered abuse. Why would you spank your wife? Okay. No, not like that. If you want to spank her in the fun way, that's one thing. But that's not what they're talking about here. Here, they're talking about spanking as a form of corporal punishment. Obviously, everybody can have their own definitions of what works for their children. I'm not going to tell you how to raise your kids. There is a part of me that thinks that maybe if you can't find any way to communicate with your child besides hitting them, then maybe you need to find a different way of teaching. But again, I'm not a parent, so I don't actually have any authority or any experience to talk about that. I think there are more effective ways, but also, what do I know? I don't. So, I just noticed this guy's articles go all the way back to 2014. Oh God, material for days. That's unfortunate. This person's been an abuser for that long. Jesus. But in all those situations, regardless of what the conversation about spanking or anything is for children, you shouldn't do that for your wife. There's no point where you should have corporeal punishment integrated into your relationship, unless, of course, you find yourself in a BDSM sub-dom relationship in which that's part of your contract. That's a different story, though. That's a particular type of lifestyle that works that into the actual functionings of that lifestyle, which is something that I'm sure this person wouldn't condone, because the idea of a sub-dom contract probably completely evades them. For those of you that have seen 50 Shades of Grey, also, that's not how a contract works. Just letting you know. That movie's a piece of horse shit. For anybody that watches that and thinks that that's how BDSM works, no. That's how Twilight fanfiction works, but it's not how BDSM works. Anybody that thinks that 50 Shades of Grey is a good way to look at that can fuck right off. Frankly. That's a story about abuse, not BDSM. Under this definition of physical abuse, spanking one's child or wife would be considered abuse. See my article, Does the Bible Allow Wife Spanking? For more on that issue. A mother or father slapping their rebellious child, even with an open palm, front-handed, would be guilty of physical abuse under this definition. Of fucking course they would! Don't slap your child! If you're going to hit them on the bum for spanking, I was spanked when I was raised. My grandparents were told to go out of the woods and grab a switch. Whatever situation they found themselves in, problematic. But again, not what we're talking about here. But if you're going to be in a situation where you can actively just slap your son or daughter in the face, that's not very far from just punching them. And I'm not even okay with a slap. I'm not. I don't think that should be okay. Not at all. So, Suris says, nah, when my mom slapped me, I grabbed her arms and told her never hit me again. Sister called the cops. Cops said she was parenting, and what I did was assault. My mother loved her willow switches. We deserved it, though. Yeah, the switches, again, that's its own issue. I'm not going to tell people how to parent. However, Zero, I think you had the right idea. If your parent is trying to hit you and you grab them and stop them from doing so, that should not be considered assault. Just letting you know, the cops were fucking wrong. Sorry. For anybody that wants to see what happens when this scenario is brought to its logical extreme, if anybody here has read the series, or it's one book, but it's a 3-part series as well, called A Child Called It, or Child Named It. That is one of the most egregious examples of child abuse that was ever recorded in American history. Obviously, there's a little bit of dramatization because it's a book, and narratives are a thing. But the person that happened to was a real person. Basically, it was a older brother in a scenario where the mom was incredibly abusive and almost killed him. Like, got him in situations where she would say, clean the bathroom, and stick him in there with ammonia and bleach. Instead, clean the bathroom with ammonia and bleach. For those who don't know, combining ammonia and bleach makes a form of mustard gas. She would force him to drink various compounds that would burn his throat. She would beat him profusely for literally anything. And then when he left the home, went to join the Air Force, all of the abuse turned onto his little brother. And she had to do it to him instead, because he actually returned to the house. So, Adam Forge, I just logged in and I'm already triggered. You cut your hair. Warning to people, it's a really good book, but very traumatizing to victims of abuse who aren't prepared for it. No, I agree, Jordan. I agree. It is a book that I think everybody should read. There's a lot of books everybody should read, honestly. If you're a functioning human being, you should be reading, and you should always be trying to learn more, at least in some form or fashion. Definitely read that series if you want to see the logical extreme case of child abuse. It will give you a very good frame of mind from a first-person perspective of what it looks like and feels like. It's horrid. But, said, wait, isn't there a lady on YouTube telling people to do that? That there's now some sort of homeopathy cure-all, or was that hydrogen peroxide? I'm not certain. I think it should be a huge exception. I think I gave my daughter a light pat on the butt. Couldn't have been painful, but it was shocking to her, and she never behaved like that again. Again, whatever you want to do for your parenting is fine, but don't hit your kid in the face. There's an argument that can be made about spanking. There's an argument that can be made about switches. Again, I had to go with the spanking when I was growing up. I don't think that it's particularly right to teach kids that violence is how you solve those issues, but again, that's up to the parent. But if you have a situation where you're striking the child in the face, probably, instead of parenting, jail might be better. Just saying. Says, I agree on my article on abuse that things like shoving and punching have no place in the home, not even as methods of discipline, because they risk serious bodily injury or even death in violation of God's law regarding limits on discipline. I also agreed that things like biting, kicking, and hair pulling have no place in the home as methods of discipline, as it should be done in love and in control and not as a brawl or fight. But again, overall, the biggest problem with the government's definition of physical abuse is that its definition negates physical discipline in the home, which God allows. No. The issue is not with the government's version of it. The issue is with your version of it. Easy. Sexual abuse. Coercing or attempting to coerce any sexual contact or behavior without consent. Sexual abuse includes, but is not limited to, marital rape, attacks on sexual parts of the body, forcing sex after physical violence has occurred, or treating one in a sexually demeaning manner. All things that I can agree are absolutely horrible. But, of course, the writer of this article disagrees. First, we will address where this government definition of sexual abuse aligns with God's moral law, and that is regarding children. Yeah, pedophilia is, in practice, horrible and wrong and should not ever be done. A parent has absolutely no right under God's law to touch their child in a sexual way, to coerce them, to force them to have sex. But the children can force the parent to have sex, because that's what happened to Lot. No, I'm kidding. That's horrible. That's a bad scenario, too. Don't do that. Don't get your parents drunk. This is a violation of God's moral laws regarding incest. God doesn't have moral laws regarding incest. I don't care what Leviticus says. If God actually had moral laws regarding incest, he would have created more than Cain. He would have created more than Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel. If God had moral laws regarding incest, then the entire line from Noah would not be incestuous. So no, if it says that there are moral laws regarding incest, then sorry, the Bible is wrong on that because it contradicts its own imperative. No. So, it says, but really the heart of the definition is directed as husbands in regard to how they engage in sexual activity with their wives, because God cares about how you use your pee-pee. When applied to the husband-wife relationship, this definition of sexual abuse, for the most part, nullifies God's word. How? Let's find out. The government definition of sexual abuse, as with physical abuse, nullifies a husband's God-given sexual rights to his wife's body in marriage. I'm going to say it slowly. I'm going to say it slowly for the people in the back. I'm going to say it slowly for the writer of biblical gender roles because I think he's got a learning disability and he might need it spoken very, very slowly. Nobody has rights to their wife's body. Nobody has rights to your body. The only person who can determine who can use your body is you. Period. That's how it works. If I do not consent, as an example, for Pam to do something to me, she cannot do it. If Pam does not consent for me to do something to her, I cannot do it. Period. There is no give or take. There is no just succumb. There's only, is it okay if I do this? No? Okay, I don't. You're not to use your partner against their will. Period. Also, how's it going, Live Reason Vision? So, no. Under no situation is that okay. But there's more. The Bible says that sex is both a right and a responsibility in marriage. And all the fuck-ass different passages it uses to explain that. And that the only thing that must be mutually agreed upon in the area of sex is when a couple will not have sex for a short time. See my articles on sexual refusal, sexual consent, and forced sex in marriage for more on what the Bible says about these topics. I don't give a flying fuck about what the Bible says about sex. Here's why. Fuck your book from 2,000 years ago. It has no place in any relationship, not mine or anyone else's. Period. Just no ifs, ands, or buts. Not a single one. When I see stuff like this is how you create rape apologetics. No. There's a slight buzz in the background. Let me to fix that. Maybe, possibly. In an ideal world, that fixes things. It might not. Unfortunately, that slight buzz in the background might just be because I'm using a Blue Yeti microphone. And that's what happens with the mic. It's an unfortunate side effect of this being the mic that I use. Eventually, I'll be upgrading it, but I don't have the money to do that yet. If anybody wants to buy me a radio condenser mic, then I won't stop you, but I definitely cannot afford one right now. Till then, we will be using the wonderful Yeti. So, let's continue on with emotional abuse. Hold on. Said, can we try that yet? It's not that bad. How about now? Now, I'm actually curious as to what they're talking about here. That is from Angry Hairpiece. I'm not familiar with you. Which is fine. Go raid GI's mic. I mean, GI actually used the Yeti until he got a radio condenser mic. Like, Godless Cranium used Yeti until he got a radio condenser mic. This is like YouTuber's baby first microphone. Someone quick put that on Suris' wish list. Go ahead. I need to actually make that wish list where people can order things for me and send them, as opposed to like having to email things and me doxing myself. That it's not that bad hearing no. No, hearing no is not a bad thing. If your spouse says no, just take it. I'll be honest. Here's what you do. Here's what you do. And this is a suggestion for the article writer of Biblical Gender Roles. If you find yourself in a situation where your wife will not have sex with you, there is an option. You go to www.pornhub.com, and you can find all kinds of interesting things there that you may or may not be able to do with your wife. That's an option. So, I see one dislike, must be a Christian in the chat. If there's a Christian in the chat who agrees with anything in this article, then they're not a Christian. They're just a horrible fucking human being. They may or may not be a Christian. Sorry. Emotional abuse. Undermining an individual's sense of self-worth or self-esteem is abusive. Yes. This may include, but not limited to, constant criticism, diminishing one's abilities, name-calling, or damaging one's relationship with his or her children. Okay, now let's see what fucking apologetic they use. While we need to be careful of how subjective this government definition of emotional abuse is, I think for the most part it aligns with what the scriptures say that we should generally do. See my article on What Does the Bible Say About Abuse for more on the subject of emotional abuse. Okay, neat. That's fine. At least they agreed on that. If they said that we needed to emotionally abuse our spouses as well, I would probably figure out where this person lives. Send the hammer missiles there. Apollo says, are there any atheists that agree with this article in the chat? If you do agree with this article in the chat, let me know. I would love to hear how. If you're Christian as well, I don't care. Let me know. Hell, I'd even be more than willing to bring you on for a conversation. Not right this second, because I'm only going to be live here for another 20-25 minutes before I hop over to the Raging Atheist channel. But I would love to have that conversation to figure out where you're coming from. Reason Vision says, wait, you're getting drunk or something? No, actually. Funny story, I've never drank alcohol before, and I don't plan on ever drinking it, because I have a very addictive personality. So if I actually did drink alcohol, I have no guarantee of when I would stop. However, I do have sweet tea. And it's quite useful. It's quite helpful. So, let us continue. Economic abuse is defined as making or attempting to make an individual financially dependent by maintaining total control over financial resources, withholding one's access to money, or forbidding one's attendance at school employment. Funny story, me and Pam have separate accounts. When I earn money, it goes into mine, and when she earns money, it goes into hers, and we make agreements as to who actually gets to pay what bills, and those agreements change literally every other month. And that's fine, because it means that we can both be responsible for our own fucking finances. Neither of us get to control the other's finances. Unless, of course, we're in a situation where if one of us doesn't put our foot down on the other, then, there's no rent being paid. Of course, in situations like that, if I want to be stubborn, then she can say, no, we have to spend it. And if she wants to be stubborn, then I can do the same. But that's just a matter of staying in your house. Past that, any excess money, we both get to keep. I think that's a fair thing to do. I'm not a fan of a joint account. I'm more of a fan of having separate accounts and letting us both be accountable to our own stuff. That's just me. It's worked for over 2 years. I'm hoping it will continue to work. Ralph says, also skimming it is not reading it, and as a former fundamental theist, I know most of my peers didn't read shit. Recent Vision says, if you do agree with the article, feel free to unsubscribe, or at least come with a solid justification that we probably can't imagine right now. Adam says, watching 12 hours of atheist science-based YouTube a day, I have an addiction, but I'm not apologizing for it. Okay. So let's see here. The government definition of economic abuse is a complete addition to God's moral law and nullifies a husband's right towards his wife under God's law. Let's not kid ourselves that they are speaking equally to husbands and wives. This is an attack on patriarchy and men having their wives being equally or being economically dependent on them. That's a good thing. Oh boy. Let's continue. The fact that this definition of economic abuse is exactly opposite of God's moral law on the issue. In Exodus, we are told that if a man does not provide his wife with food and clothing, she may be free of him, divorced from him. God considers it economic abuse when a man forces his wife to be economically independent of him. No, that's not how it works. No, your wife should be independent of you. Your wife should not be in a situation where she is so dependent on your finances that without you, she would starve. Because that means that it opens up the door to this kind of abuse. Reason Vision has it very right. Freedom is slavery. No. That's not how this works. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're so economically dependent on your spouse that if they do happen to be abusive, you would find yourself hurt, harmed, or any issue. That's not a good thing. This biblical framing of it is literally just saying that freedom is slavery. It's horrible. Pegasus says, my wife doesn't need to work. That used to be something to brag about. Fortunately, it isn't anymore. No, I agree. I think that being in a situation where the husband is making enough money for the wife to just take care of the house, you know what? For me and Pam, that would be a dream scenario. If I was making enough money for us to take care of the entire house, and her to just quit her job and just take care of the house, we would both be incredibly happy. Unfortunately, though, that's not the case. Also, I would never expect it to be the case that she would not be allowed to go out and make her own money as well, and not be allowed to have it in her own account. That's her money that she earned, period. Whether she wants to go out and work it or not, that's her prerogative. But if she does, which she does, because we need to, that's hers, period. She is economically independent of me. If we were to break up right now, I have my own money coming in, she has her own money coming in, and that's the healthy way to do it. Not this freaking hodgepodge here that basically keeps an abuse victim trapped in a house. Said, yes, husbands under God's law can absolutely forbid their wives from going to college or seeking careers, as wives are subjects to their husband in everything. What? No. I'm sorry, but there's no point. If Pam wanted to go to college right now, and we could afford it, I would have no right to stop her. If Pam were offered a career law firm right now, I would have no right to stop it. Nor would I want to. Why would you stop somebody from living their life? Like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. As far as the household finances go, whether her husband allows his wife to go work or not, all the financial decision-making comes under his direction. If he wants to take away his wife's ATM card, he can do that under God's law. Okay, look, I have a problem with this. Dark Killer says, one of the top 15 fugitive worldwide on the United States list is a father of an Egyptian origin who got pissed at his older daughter for smiling at customers. He killed both daughters. Ew. Ew. That's horrible. So I have a bit of personal history that shows why this particular line of reasoning is horrible. So when I was living with my mom and stepdad, different stepdad than I have now, thankfully, the stepdad that I had back then was an emotionally abusive stepdad. Moreover, not only was he emotionally abusive, but he was very limiting. I wasn't allowed to talk if I walked outside of my room. I wasn't allowed to have friends over at the house, but maybe like once every month-ish, maybe. And even then, it was completely random on whether or not he'd say yes or no. So I had to always leave the house. People just couldn't be in the house. It wasn't a thing that could happen. I had to be very quiet. If I walked outside of my room to even say hello to the dog, I would get talked to severely for doing so. Not a great scenario. Not good at all. And there's a reason this is problematic. We were a very biblical household. I went to a IFB freaking private school. So one of the things that happened in this household was that, like I said, the stepfather was incredibly abusive. And he did have control over a lot of the finances. If me and my mom wanted to go out and get food, we weren't allowed to. Not if he didn't approve of it. We had to sneak that all the time. Like, you want to go out and get pizza? Do it under the radar. Do you want to go out and get Whataburger? Do it under the radar. She wanted to get me a video game. Had to do it under the radar. And here's the thing. The justification was always that he was the biblical leader of the household. There came a time where he suffered from depression. And I can't fault him for not being able to work because of his depression. Because eventually he did succumb to his depression and was unable to really function that well. And I do feel for the guy, at least in that, because I've had that happen to me too. I had anxiety and depression make me lose a $40,000 a year career that had full benefits. Losing that was absolutely devastating to me, but it happened, so I can understand when that happens to other people. But here's the thing. Once he lost that job, he still maintained his position as head of the household. Because Bible. It opened up a tornado for abuse in the home. So when I read articles like this that are actively spouting apologetics for people that do the scummy shit that he did, all I see is my childhood. All I see is the same shit that I went through that I would not wish on another child. No part of me wants that to be what happens to any other human being. One of the best days of my life was the day where they officially got their divorce, or at least separated. It was one of the first times that I got to actually have a bunch of friends over at my house. It was a freaking magical scenario. So just knowing the feeling of elation that happened when we were finally free of all that, seeing shit like this causes me to have personal issues. So, honestly, originally I was tackling biblical gender roles because everybody was posting the article on the on one of the more abusive articles, and I wanted to tackle it, put in my 2 cents, take care of it, do what you do as a Skeptic Atheist channel. Unfortunately, because I'm seeing a lot of the stuff that I grew up with, I'm starting to think that this website's going to become a personal matter for me. And I'm probably going to be taking a personal interest in debunking most of the stuff on this website. It means that I'll probably be doing this for a while. But I think that's going to happen. Shit like this should not stand. But we're going on. Psychological abuse. Elements of psychological abuse include, but are not limited to, causing fear by intimidation, threatening physical harm to self, partner, children, or partner's family or friends, destruction of pets, property, and forcing isolation from family, friends, or school and or work. If read in a certain way, the government's definition of psychological abuse may actually align with Scripture's. God does forbid the use of threatening. If a husband or wife threatens to kill themselves or their children with pets to destroy property if they don't get what they want, it is the very definition of threatening behavior, which is condemned by the word of God. However, a warning from an authority towards one under them of the consequence of their actions is not engaging in threatening or psychological abuse. If I isolate my teen son from friends that are a bad influence on him, is that psychological abuse? The answer is no. It all depends on my motivation. Well, it also depends on the situation. You might think that they're a bad influence, but what if they're a bad influence only because they happen to be atheists, and you are the leader of one of these abusive households, the one that I grew up in, as an example, and it's only the fact that your son is hanging out with these atheists that he's realizing why that abuse is happening. If this is the case, then what you're determining as a negative influence on your son is actually a positive influence on your son, and you're the negative influence. This is the nuance of that situation. Continuing on, it all depends on my motivation. No, it all depends on the motivation. There's multiple things. It doesn't just matter on yours. Your authority isn't shit. Is my intent simply to exert my power over him, or is it actually for his own good? If it is the latter, there is nothing immoral about him or about this from a biblical perspective. Let's scroll down a little bit because I see... Hold on. Misha says, are you sure you want to take this on? I mean, you do such a great job when you take on these sites in a rational way. There is so much emotional baggage involved. There is emotional baggage, but I think it's because of the emotional baggage that I want to take this on. This does mean, and because I do these live, these aren't scripted, these aren't anything that I go into knowing full well what's going to happen. Also, I'm thinking that this might be a good emotional support cat, because after talking about the stepdad thing, she just kind of immediately came up and started helping. But when I see stuff like this, I do see what I went through. And there's a reason why I tackle certain things on my channel. Hey there. Stuff like this, it's stuff that I physically went through growing up, so I have a horse in the race of making sure that people do not deal with this type of abuse. When I do my stuff on LGBTQ, which I know is a decent focus on my channel, I used to be a raging homophobe when I was a Christian. I had a lot of friends that had to kind of shut me down and let me know that, hey, what I was doing was wrong. I have a horse in that race. I see my past self in some of these people. I have a lot of emotional investment in everything on my channel. It's just a benefit of doing scripted videos. Or not scripted. None of my videos are actually scripted, except collaborations. But it's a benefit of having edited videos that I can seem more rational on stuff like that. Also, whenever I am focusing on an article and it's becoming kind of problematic, I usually let the people in my Discord know. That's usually a thing that I'll do. So, if you want to support, one of the best ways you can do, if you want to do it on an individual basis, Discord is a good way to get in contact with me. And there are some people that I do let know when I'm going through some shit over there. That's the thing you can do, if you want to. Lonnie says, I grew up Southern Old Temple Baptist. I think you can imagine the horrible person I was. I can imagine it because I was probably the same person. I honestly really was. So when I see stuff like that, it's just the person that I saw. Unfortunately, I'm only going to be online for another 5 minutes on my channel before getting ready to go on to Raging Atheist channel. I would love to tackle the rest of this article, but I can't because I don't have time. So I'm just going to have to figure out how I want to do the rest of this article later. But I did want to scroll down because I saw the word feminists, and I got some history with that. And I wanted to read that and see what they say. So, for all you feminists out there, the practice of a husband exercising his spiritual authority over his wife in these ways does not infantilize her or make her equal with her children. God has granted a wife and mother more rights than he has her children. She has sexual rights to her husband's body. No, she doesn't. And she is given the position of manager of the home and of the children, which are sacred and honored roles. Yeah, and in cultures that sacrifice virgins, that's also a sacred and honored role. It being a sacred and honored role doesn't mean that it's not abusive. Sorry. She, of course, exercises these positions under the authority of her husband, but by no means does the Bible make wives and children equal with one another. Okay, so you're just talking about there being a hierarchy. What the fuck does that matter? So when we throw out the straw man argument that the husband is exercising control over his wife infantilizes her, when we come to the real heart of the issue, so the one who's actually straw manning that argument is you. You admit that it's a straw man. That's good, but you are the actual one who's straw manning, because I don't hear the argument from husbands treat their wives like children. That's not something that I actually hear. Feminists don't like the fact that while God gives women more rights than children, he does not give women equal rights with men. In other words, it's not about women being treated as children, it's about women being treated as women. Feminists want to be treated as men. Of course they do, because you want equal rights. There's nothing wrong with wanting equal rights. Equal rights are fine. If a woman does not have equal rights, that's a problem. A child is a minor. A child is somebody who is completely dependent on the parent, at least to an extent. I'm fine with there being a few other rights that are not quite given to the child yet, because they're given upon adulthood. And as a result, also, the law is more lenient on them when it comes to issues of like vandalism and stuff like that. An adult would get a lot more time, at least in America, than a child would in situations like that. There's some checks and balances there for children. But when it comes to men and women should be treated very equally. I'm all for that, personally. So if you find yourself in a situation where your belief structure or your religion is reliant on people not having equal rights, then I would argue that maybe your belief structure is horseshit and needs to be tossed out the window. I've met plenty of Christians who agree that equal rights are fine. I've met feminists who are Christians, not just second-wave feminists, but hyper-third-wave feminists. I've met these people. They exist. Their religions weren't threatened by this. Your religion doesn't have to be threatened by this either. But the fact that you make it threatened by this is very telling. It's very telling of the type of person that you are. It's very telling of how fragile the power that you actually have is. It's very telling of what happened with your first marriage. And Reason Vision says, and fourth wave. Fourth wave is a little bit harder to define. That's its own conversation that I'm not getting into right now. But if you give women equal rights, how can you justify hitting them? Very simple. Very simple. Give the woman equal rights to hitting men. If you want to give men rights to spanking and hurting their wives, you know what? Just give the women equal rights to do so. Watch how quickly that check and balance happens. Because I don't know if any of you have ever been slapped hard, but there's a certain level of slappage that prevents you from doing shit. And if you're going to say that a man has the ability to physically abuse a woman, then maybe you should just let the woman do the same thing back to the man and see how quickly that shit stops. Otherwise, be decent human beings to each other and don't hit each other. That's a good idea, too. With one exception. Me and Pam do boffer sparring every now and again, and we actually have like big foam boffer weapons, and those hurt a lot when they're cracked against your skull, but we have hit each other with them because we go out and spar. So, I mean, yeah, if you're going to engage in a type of martial art, then that's its own thing, but that's a subcategory. Dark Killer says, what is a better choice? Also, you're not answering my question right now. You call a choice a consequence, that's happening to something else. So, with Robert says, I was kicked in the groin by my wife once by mistake, so I feel the pain. You do not want to know how many times me and Pam have been laying in bed, and she, like, tries to pop me on the leg just for fun, and it just so happens that instead of the leg, she has hit a testicle. There's no worse pain than being just on the testicle, or on the testicle. Either one of those things. Some of the worst pain that you will ever experience as a man. It is not even intentional. It's just a thing that happens. But point is, I think that women and men should have equal rights. I wish I could get into the rest of this article, but let me go ahead and show you exactly how much longer the article is. This is how much more we had to get through. You see the problem. I think I might have to tackle either the rest of this article in another video or another one of their shorter articles. But this article is obnoxiously long, and I just don't have time to do the entire thing, which sucks because there's so much crap in here. There's 14 what-if questions about marriage, like what if my spouse makes fun of my looks on a regular basis? If they're not just doing it in jest, they're actually doing it to be malicious, then your spouse is a fucking asshole. What if my spouse hurls insults at me on a daily basis? That would go back to this one. He's a fucking asshole. What if my spouse is bipolar, has some other mental illness, and refuses to get professional help? That's a case-by-case basis thing. What if my spouse has some type of addiction? Again, that's a case-by-case basis thing. Do you want to help them through that? Do you want to be the person that lets them go through that scenario and become a better person? Or do you think that it's healthier for you to abandon them? It could be either one. You could find yourself in a situation where you help them get away from it. You could be in a situation where it's not good for your health to be there. And I'm not going to continue with all of them because, again, I just don't have time, which sucks. But I noticed nothing about singles. Yeah, pretty much. Brian says, it seems like a lot of these questions are, I've married a horribly abusive person, and I'm not allowed to divorce them like you did. Yeah, pretty much. I would argue this person might even say that a wife is not allowed to divorce a husband. I don't know. I'll look at their articles and find out. But there's, how many articles do they have? They've consistently written 2 to 20 articles a month from 2014 all the way up to 2019. So, yeah, no. I'm going to have to go through and see what some of this stuff is. But with that said, I hope you guys enjoyed the bit of the article we were able to get through. I wish I was able to get through the entire thing, but an hour and 37 minutes in, and we still have not been able to get through all of the horse crap that is in there. But, that said, here in 13-ish minutes, I will be on the Raging Atheist channel. So you guys need to definitely look forward to that. The link to his channel is in the description below. So please, please, please do me a favor. Follow onto that channel. And I will see you guys again here in a few minutes. So, and Pegasus says, yes, I agree that this person is a horrible human being. Daniel Davis says, thanks for the honest talk. It must be hard to relive it. It's not as hard as you would think because I'm not a spouse in an abusive relationship right now. I have been, but I'm not right now, and none of it had to do with religion. So I'm not reliving the worst parts about this article. I'm just reliving some of them. So that's at least good, at the very least. Finner says, not sure how much more of that any of us should take in an afternoon. That's true. That's true. It's interesting. And no, Robert X, I will not hate you for liking Godless Iowans' channel. I would not have created Godless Iowans' marriage video or his wedding video if I didn't like the guy. He's one of my best friends. Definitely go over and subscribe to him. But until then, check out the Raging Atheist channel. I will be over there in about 10 minutes now because I've been stalling. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. I will see you guys tomorrow for tomorrow's episode. Raging Atheist channel here in a few minutes. And I'm coughing because I need to take a drink. So, thank you guys for coming out and watching. I know it's a little earlier than usual, but I wanted to go ahead and get this out of the way so that I could also go onto that channel as well. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed. I will see you all in about 10 minutes. Link is in the description. Follow me there.